Today we have on the show Simone Anzboeck. Simone coaches ambitious international professionals to navigate the inevitable inflection points in career and life that come from living abroad. Simone is a coach who works with international professionals on a one-to-one basis, but also offers B2B services through her brand, Prosper Abroad. Her passion for global development comes after her own personal experience, having lived and worked in 15 countries. To date, she has coached people from over 20 different nationalities. Simone, it is a pleasure to have you on today.
Thanks for having me, Mikkel. I should learn to unmute.
Yes. First, I want to start out by you sharing your own personal journey. Where were you born and how did you first come to international life?
So I was born in Austria, and I had a very, very Austrian traditional upbringing. Literally small village, farming family. So actually no contact at all through my family in international life. But I don't know what it was. I always had that itch to get out of the village, to get out of the country. And my first experience was an exchange semester in England during, I was like in my teens, English learning. And then, yeah, it just grew from there. And when I was 25, I moved to New Zealand after university and never looked back since then.
That's amazing. New Zealand, that's a big one. So you went
All the
full
way.
all the way. So I know there's a story to how you came to the work you're doing now. But I want to know first, you said you've just always had it. What do you think that thing is that you've always had?
Um, the thing that I always had, I think the curiosity for knowing what's out there, the curiosity for new things, adventure. I think early on, I learned to stop that a bit now, but I think early on I had this restlessness, like the restlessness to be in one place, to do one thing. I just always wanted to experience more. And once you start living abroad, I think once I found it the first time, I just couldn't stop. I was like, okay, what's next?
So it's like an insatiable curiosity about the world around you.
Yeah, probably it's a good way to put it.
No, I think we all have it. I just love to hear people describe what it is for them. So I love
Mhm.
that. And so I can imagine there's not really a degree to study in supporting people living abroad. So how did you come to this work, or how did it find you?
Yeah, a good point. Did I find it or did it find me? That's probably a philosophical question for another podcast. So I had a kind of international career first before I went into coaching, which is what I do now. So I fell into that. Like I basically worked in global development, international development, and kind of moved around. That's how I, lived in so many places and worked in so many countries. And then I think I fell into it because I decided to move abroad for my partner's job for once. So we moved to Myanmar. And before that, obviously, I've lived abroad, I've moved abroad. I was like, yeah, I'm going to go to Myanmar. It's going to be all be great. But I guess I didn't realize how the decision to leave behind a full-time job, to move to a new place for someone else, to then have this whole thing of not really having any anchor points, really brought down an identity crisis, a big one for me. And that was really the inflection point when I realized with all the kind of personal development I've done and seeing what goes around for other people moving and living an international life, that's when coaching kind of appeared, I guess. Maybe it found me. And that's when I retrained.
Yeah.
And since then, I'm doing that.
So tell me, I want you to go into that because really slowly, because very few people know how to describe this well, even though a lot of people have this experience. So the experience of leaving, having that identity crisis, can you
Mhm.
maybe go through that a little bit of what you've learned, but also your own personal experience with it?
So I have I have experienced identity crisis very much in relation to my work, and that is I think a lot of us professionals, I think our identity very much relates to something that we do on a daily basis, right? And a lot of it is like a lot of us find fulfillment in work or find fulfillment in doing things we love. And so when I then moved, I lost that. Plus, I lost my existing relationships. I lost the place I'm familiar with. In a way, my partner was not at home. I was in a country that I wasn't familiar with, where I didn't even understand the language. So you kind of lose the guardrail. I would sometimes describe it. You kind of lose a guardrail for who you are. And I think that's and it happens all at the same time as well. It's not just one thing that happens. It's everything that changes. And I think, first of all, our brain. Yeah.
I just want to say one thing. So before, you had moved many times before
Yes.
for a
Correct.
job
Yes.
and didn't have this exact experience. You probably had experienced other things,
Yes.
but this exact experience was you for the first time moving with your partner's job. And that is when this kind of crisis came about. Do I have that right?
Yeah. And I think you really phrased it well. But, before that, I moved in a way for my purpose, if that makes sense. I moved countries because I wanted to move countries, because I got a new job, or I was looking for a new job, and this was, in a way, I made the decision, obviously not just for him, right? But in a way, I made the decision to move so someone else could find their purpose. And I guess I didn't realize that I then was stuck in, like, okay, what's my purpose? What do I do? And for someone who is very ambitious, and I've always, I guess, been that way. I was like, okay, what do I now want to do? And that really, really brought a lot of tension, because I think you have to be patient with yourself when you go to a new place.
Yeah.
There's so much to unpack. So so much to unpack that I could say. And one is probably the patience. And the other thing is, I think a lot of people, when they're in this situation, they, in a way, that restlessness, they're like, okay, I need to get busy. How can I get busy? And so I think a lot of people jump in to do something, whether it's immediately find a job or, whatever, get active. But I wanted to do this thing different. I wanted to actually use that time to really discover what else there might be for me. And that was the hard process to do, to sit with that for an extended period of time.
Yeah. And that, I think, is really, really important. And I love how you've described it. Was it intentional that you were trying to look for something else? Or is this in hindsight that you're realizing that was your process?
It's both, I would say. So in hindsight, I definitely see also how I tried to get busy while at the same time wanting to enjoy the process. So there was this tension that I was navigating, and couldn't really enjoy the process because I felt I didn't have purpose. So I definitely was navigating that while I was living it, and at the same time, because I had a coach at the time as well, I could kind of work through it, and that was kind of the help for me to kind of process what was going on. And actually be very intentional about that, and not fall into, I guess maybe the usual things that we do, coping mechanisms that we have developed.
Yeah. And so is that the first time you had hired a coach?
No.
Was then, or was that a common thing for you? Okay. And then, so I think that you're just the best person to do this. So forgive me going back into the detail, because I find this is such a nuanced experience that we all go through alone a little bit, if that makes sense. And what you're doing is trying to bring it out and coach people through it. But what I want to hear from you is, what didn't you realize about moving for someone else? What was the thing that surprised you the most that you didn't realize maybe that would help people understand their partner that's doing this for them a bit better?
I think there's two things there. One is, I think the experience of processing the change is different, right? So you move as a couple, but the way you process that change will be different, right? So in our case, I've been an experienced mover. For my partner, it was, the second time he moved abroad. So the process of, there's just other things that felt way more easy for me, right? In terms of processing the change, getting familiar with the place, all of those kind of things. So the process was different. So in terms of like what your element of uncertainty, like how you deal with uncertainty, how your level of curiosity, how open you are to things, that will influence how you go through that, first few months of adapting to the new place. And how do you
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you think that's different? Since you've been on both sides, this is what I really want to get to. You've been on the side of moving for your job and you've been on the side
Yes.
of not moving for your job. So what didn't you expect? What's the things that you
So
didn't
I think what I
realize?
didn't expect that it was what I didn't expect was that me giving up my full-time job, even though I did it intentionally, and I was like, oh, I want to do something else. I'm going to use this. That it hit me so hard that I then was at that place. My partner was at work. I was basically alone, in a way, like trying to find my own thing. That was so hard for me to sit with and be not have the phone ring or an email or receive an email to say, hey, there's a problem to solve, or there's a meeting to attend. How that suddenly, just with the vacuum of being somewhere new, not having the job and the vacuum of being somewhere new, how that would completely crush my confidence. That
Yeah.
would happen. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's that lack of structure. There's no structure and it's kind of, you have to build it yourself. And is that the journey you would say you went on
Yes,
is,
you build it yourself, right? I think and that's where you asked me what the difference might be between the people moving. I'm not sure if that was the question, but I think the difference, but if you move with your partner, and you move for someone else's partner's job, or maybe your partner moves for your job, just be in mind that you, the person who has the job, you go into a new place. Yes, you move abroad, but you go with a purpose, right? So you go into the office the next day, you have a social network, like even they might not be friends, but you have someone around you. And that was happened to me when I moved for my when I moved for myself for different countries. I mostly did it for work, right? So there was a structure, there was something, one anchor point that you had that helps you to settle in. Whereas your partner that basically moves for you might not have anything because maybe they give up their job. Um, and obviously if you have family, if you have children, we don't have children. If you have children, it gets even more complicated because then, who is the person that looks after the children? It's another, you give something else to the kids, but you don't look after yourself, right? So there is that element as well, which is for people with families, it's even more complicated.
yeah. Okay. And so when you were going through this, it sounds like you had a coach and that really helped you to keep perspective, would you say? Like like you're not just deteriorating and like lazy and never going to make it out of this. Was that key for you?
Yeah, I mean, I probably want to say that it's not the first time I had a coach. So I did had coaches before. So in a way, I knew that that help was helpful for me at that point, right? Um, and so I think what was helpful, first of all, is processing. I think just processing the experience and putting words to it. Like putting words to the fact that I had an identity crisis, or I have a meaning crisis, or I'm angry, whatever it is, right? Like whatever you're going through, grief. We might talk about grief, later. Um, just putting words to it and having someone that helps you process that, and then helps you develop structure around, okay, so you're there now, let's find out where you want to go. And often you don't know where you want to go, so having someone to help you explore, I call it the explore phase. I think it's very important, um, because the person you are in that moment, whatever inflection point you have in your life, the person you are is different than it was yesterday. So how can you explore what's important to you now that then you can take forward into your next phase?
And how would you say a coach is different than a therapist?
I would say that so a therapist for me, and obviously it's a gray area, right? Not necessarily black and
Yeah,
white.
of
But if you
course.
look at it from a black and
Yeah.
white point of view, a therapist is for someone who maybe struggles with normalizing emotions. So it's like about sitting and processing the kind of mm, uh, mm, how do you say, managing emotions in a good way, right? Whereas a coach normally works with someone. I'm not a therapist. I don't work with people that have difficulty managing strong emotions. So a coach works with someone who is able to experience emotions and manage the emotions, but helps them move forward with it, right? So it's like very much about, okay, what do you need at the end of the session to do something different afterwards, or what's the next for
Yeah.
you? So it's a bit more forward looking rather than backward looking, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. That's a really good answer. And would you say that people who move abroad once or even many times experience more of these inflection points over their life?
Yes. And I guess I wanted to say at this point, Mikhail, that what we talked about, my experience with moving with a partner, is a very specific one, right? Like, not everybody of your listeners will move with their partner, right? And so I also wanted to say that the transition points might not just be the fact that you physically relocate. The transition point might be that you made home somewhere, away from your birth country or home country, and you had certain expectations for how long you're going to be there, and then you realize you're going to, after 5 years, you're still here, and it's like, okay, that feels like an inflection point now. Do I stay? Do I go? Or you find a partner from a different country and nationality, and you're like, oh, how does that now? Kids, family. So I think yes, because short answer is yes, because there's so many more factors at play when you decide to live in international lives that
Yeah.
just messes it up in some form.
Yeah. Well, you can't live an unexamined life for sure. I feel like
No.
if you stay, sometimes all the decisions are made for you, and that can be comforting. But choosing this path, you confront every single one of your choices and make them a little bit more intentionally, perhaps. And there's just more forcing functions to having those be very intentional. And so, tell us. Um, yeah, I want to know a little bit about what is you like. Tell me about your clients. Like, tell me about who they are generally, and what is unique about them. Do you think like what brings them to you?
Mhm.
I know your expertise is people living abroad and helping them navigate that, but what are the common themes you see running through all of your clients?
The common theme is that they live an international focused life, and I think they're drawn to me because I live a life like that, and they don't necessarily maybe have found someone else that understands the complexities that come with that, right? And the mixed feelings, guilt, shame, beliefs, all of these kind of things that kind of mix with it. So they tend to be internationals, meaning they live away from their home or birth country, sometimes long term somewhere else. They actually made home somewhere, or they are on a job assignment, or they decided to move. A lot of them are in how do you say, dual nationality relationships. Some are single, and I would say they have this combination of, they're ambitious, so they kind of like feel like, on the one hand, they have this tension of like, okay, things should be a certain way, like, okay, other people have, there's a certain career, there's a certain path I should go, right? Like, that's what society tells me, and um, that's what maybe people that are that I see around me that are still in my home country have. And then there is me, the messiness of me, and okay, what do I want to do next? So they are kind of like, they know there's a change that they're seeking. A lot of it is professional. There are change that they're seeking. They're seeking something else. They're seeking more meaning, but they don't quite know, like, how to get from where they are right now to either where they even want to go, or don't know how to make the path to the vision they have.
Yeah, they're blazing new trails. So I want you to go into you. We glazed over a little bit of the. I want to talk about grief because you speak about it so
Yes.
eloquently, and I really want you to share it with us about the levels of grief that maybe we experience, people living abroad experience,
Mhm.
that maybe others living a different life don't.
So I think when we think about grief, I think we always think about people, right? And which is probably the biggest form of grief, right? If you lose a loved one. But I think what we forget is, especially for us as internationals, is that grief can be about places, and grief can be about habits and routines. And maybe just to give you an example to make this a bit more palatable for people, is that I had a client who came to a coaching session, and it was about establishing a new exercise routine, right? And she just couldn't. She knew what she wanted to do. She would like yoga. She wanted to do yoga, but she couldn't get out of the house. She just couldn't, right? And so we talked a bit about that, and she realized that she the last place she lived in, so she recently moved, and the last place she lived in, she had this yoga community. She had this place that she would go to, and the people were really nice, and like, it was this kind of Monday evening yoga routine, and it was her community. And she realized through the coaching that she was hanging on to that. She was like, she was missing that part. And because she was missing it, she couldn't move on because the experience will never be like that again, right? The kind of, the idea that it will never be like that. And so it was really hard for you and for her. And she had to almost like, I gave her an exercise to like literally grieve about that situation that placed those people, the routine she had, so she could be free to not have any expectations and explore. Maybe the new routine will be better than the previous one, will be different than the previous one, but it won't be the same. And that's
Yeah.
grief, in a non-relationship form.
Yeah. I think we also grieve the possibilities that, so the life we leave behind, even if
Mm,
done intentionally, I think also grieving that is an interesting, you are choosing a very specific path, which sometimes can lead to having to grieve your parents' expectations of you, your community's expectation of
yes,
you.
yes.
Um, and so maybe that's just the first time you do it. But I think that in my experience has been one of the tougher parts, is that in order to follow my path, it actually kind of scares and hurts other people that I care about.
Yeah, and can I just say, maybe I offer a reframe on that, because yes, I mean, as I said at the beginning, I'm from a farming family. My brother lives like within 5 minutes of my parents. I'm not, like I'm the one that's gone. A lot of expectations that my parents, I think, had on what the daughter's life would be like, right? Um, and so my reframe for that is, my parents get to learn through me, right? So they learn something, or they have to learn something in their life by seeing my life, right? Um, and that was a really interesting reframe for me, to just see, okay, they are there, they're my parents. I chose them for a reason. If you think about, like, we come to Earth for maybe to be with the right people. And so I need to process that, to be my own independent person, but they need to process that. And they learn so much. I think my parents learned so much. And by the fact, visiting, right? Like, they've seen so much. My parents would never have had the opportunity to see New Zealand, or to
Yep.
see the UK, if it wouldn't be for me. So I think there's always a reframe, not to make the grief smaller. There's a process of going through that. Um,
Yep.
but we can see the learning opportunity for everybody.
Yeah. And that is really at the heart what it is, right? Like making sure that you make sense of your own life, make sense of your own choices, like make sense of them and put them in a place where they can build your life story in a way that really adds to it and helps you find where you want to go. Okay, so I know that I think we all have experience with this pros and cons list, and we have the pros and cons with if we stay, if we go, if we move, if we don't, if we um, local school, international school. I mean, you can put it all down to a simple to-do list, but I have a feeling your approach goes beyond that. So can you maybe tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when you speak about, the pros and cons and the to-do list, that's very much the rational mind, isn't it? It's like, yeah, we want to analyze and rationally dissect and make the best decisions, that come out on paper. And I found that in my own life and with a lot of my clients, that the rational mind has often doesn't have the answers, but our intuitive mind, I would say, like our intuitive knowledge has a lot more of the answers, even we might not want to see that at first, or we don't have access to it. Because when you're ruminating, you're stuck, and any more ruminating will not get you the answers. So that's where, without going into details, it's kind of like, I combine a bit more the balancing the rational mind with like going into your intuitive knowledge, your intuition a bit more. And because also that's where, what you just said before about we're creating our own path, right? We need to find what's our path. There's no one external that will tell us what our path is, right? Your life, Mikhail, my life, Mikhail, is different. Yes, we both live international lives, but it will be different. There will be no one out there that will be your blueprint. So how do you find what is right for you? And those answers you can only find in yourself.
And so you serve as a guide for that. Would you say that's part of what you do for people, with people?
Yes. Yeah, I would say I think guide is a really beautiful word. I should use that. So I guide them to find their own answers by giving tools or certain processes I have to, um, on a way, switch off the rational mind for that minute, to give them access to their possibility, really, to voices, to the inner knowing, um, just for the moment, and that, and the rational mind is there in terms of taking the decisions. We are so trained by society that the ratio will always be there. So it's not about either or, but it's about balancing it a bit more to trusting your own life design, I call it, to really honing in a bit more into that's me and that's my path, and I'm confident in that, and it will turn out well.
Yeah. I love that life design, because it is, I think social programming plays a huge part in humans, right? We want to follow our, I don't know how you put it, your tribe, your ancestors, the people that have gone before you, that what you were taught growing up. And so the rational mind, do you think that that includes social programming? Is that something else you're trying to help people maybe look at least beyond for a moment to let their intuition in?
Totally. Yeah, I would only say yes to that. Like, anything that we absorb, right? Like what we see on Instagram, what we read on LinkedIn, what we read in newspapers, what we see on TV, that's all programming, right? It's what society expects of us, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, if I just think back, kind of just, I'm sure you're probably the same generation. Disney movies. I mean, I love Disney movies as a kid, but okay, what's the storyline? There's the man on the white horse is gonna come along and save you and put you in his castle, and you're gonna live happily ever after. I mean, just alone, like that's something we absorb as children, um, and some of us live that out for the rest of our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you think that some of those things are universal? I mean, you've worked
Mhm.
with people from over 20 different backgrounds or
Mhm.
countries. Um, that makes me think that you've seen some storylines that are similar. Like, are there
Yeah.
things that everyone like are what I don't know, I don't want to say universal, but like, are there things that you see play out from people from the US and Pakistan and China and Europe, that maybe we're maybe the more the same than different?
Yeah, it's an interesting question that you asked that. I would say, without going into kind of maybe the nitty gritties are the same, sorry, different, but probably what comes into it, that what we learn from our upbringing, whether it's parents or whoever is parenting you, has a much bigger influence on a big influence on a lot of decisions we're making, right? Like that's just colors everything.
Mhm.
And for some cultures, that's stronger, right? Like if you're in an Asian culture, the expectations on children is probably bigger than in a maybe more egocentric, can I say that? Maybe more self-centered, Western culture. Sorry, this is extreme, but I guess that's how I would probably maybe describe it.
No, yeah, individualistic, I think, is the way
Individualistic.
usually
Sorry, yes,
people.
yeah,
Yeah. No, no,
individualistic.
yeah, I get it.
Thanks for that. Nicer word to use it. So I think there's maybe the forces are stronger in a way in terms of trying to free yourself from it. It might be harder, but the forces are still the same. In terms of,
Mhm.
I think I probably would put upbringing there, and yes, then societal pressures. I mean, that we mm, have to have success and it's linear, and like the kind of idea of making money, and like that's the definition of success. I think, unfortunately, I think that just through media and social media has just become very global. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that, at least from a traditional sense of what an international person has been in the past, it's very job driven. So people go a lot with their jobs.
Mm.
Would you say that's true? But I feel like, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit, it seems like there's been a little bit of a change, to being more of a conscious decision, not just moving with the job, but finding maybe manufacturing a move, that's a little more
Mm.
intentional. Would you say that's true, or maybe that's not new and I'm just new to it?
Yeah, I
Ha-
would probably say it's I think yes, I think there was definitely the traditional, people only got the opportunity to move abroad through like maybe an assignment with their company. But I would probably say, even for me and pretty much everybody of my clients, the job made it, mostly the job made it happen, right? So like they might decide, okay, we want to go, right? Like I want to have this abroad experience. And I guess financially, right, you need to support yourself. Often, the finding a job is the first thing. So in a way, the job gets you there, but the decision has been made that you wanted to kind of live more international focused. And then obviously for a lot of people in some countries, it's literally the opportunities are not there in my country, and I want to find the opportunity. So I think there's a difference depending where people maybe grew up in, and the opportunities
Interesting.
that they had. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. And do you find that there's a difference between those that are, well, I guess my point is that that is easy to go to, money being the point of everything. And when you don't have a job, so if it's everything's driven in the international community, it might be skewered maybe towards money being more important, even maybe more than in normal life, because the job is the point. The job is why you're there. The job is what you have that's familiar to you. And so my experience has been that even when I was not working and my partner was, the trailing spouses would often talk about their partner's job. They wouldn't talk about themselves at all. So it would just be like this thing that was like at the forefront of your identity as well as a trailing spouse. And I found that really interesting, that it just seemed more than back in my home country, that we would just talk about our partner's jobs a lot. And I found it kind of strange.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. No.
Yeah, I don't have an explanation for it, but I always found it very like, it felt like an alternate universe. Anyway, okay. So I want you to give us a little bit of, I want to stick with couples for a second, and then I want to go more broad. So, and when you speak in your posts about these things, I think you speak so eloquently about them. So that's why I'm asking you more broad questions, and you've had so much experience. But I want to talk about couples for one more time. And so if you were to meet someone before they relocate or make the decision, what do you think they need to think of in advance? I would say emotionally, or like how to support each other if, say,
Mm,
the couple's moving for the other person's job.
yeah, I think one of them I've definitely said already, which is know that you will have different experiences, um, adjusting and processing and going through that. Um, and I think that just needs reminding, because I think once you go through it, it's easy. You have your glasses on and your partner's there, but you don't have any other glasses, right? And it's hard to see or put the other person's glasses on. So just that, reminding that. And with that, I think the practice, I mean, that's a normal relationship practice, but I think it's even better when you move, communication. And it's almost like having like this touch point where you just sit and hear the other person process what's going on. Um, because I think when we are moving abroad, and let's just assume you have kids as well. There's so much to organize, right? And there's so many other people to take care of and settle in and whatever, right? You don't find that point for you as a couple to reconnect. And so I think I would probably say finding a regular practice once a week to like sit down for half an hour and just have the other person talk about their experiences and just listening. That's probably the two things I probably would tell people.
Okay. And then I want to know, like, is there anything you recommend for people when they're trying to decide whether to stay or go, or to make a transition or not? I mean, I know you're not about the to-do list, but as a couple, I think it's a new skill for many couples when they're abroad to have intuition together. Does that make sense? So you
Mm.
can tap into your own intuition and say, I want to go home, but that doesn't mean you're going home. Or I want to stay. That doesn't mean you're staying. And so do you have any wisdom there?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, I mean, that also we had to go through as a couple, right? As you said, we're two individuals, is almost like, mm, how do you call it? Um, no, not the, I don't know the word now, but it's like basically you are yourself, right? So you need to know what are your must-haves and what are the things that you're willing to compromise on, right? And then you develop a vision together about what's possible, right? And
Right.
that obviously means you can't have everybody can't have 50 must-haves, right? But it's like, what are the things that are really important to you, right? For some, it might be I want to live more locally, or actually it's really, I must be living in my home country for the next 10 years. Maybe the other one is flexible, right? I mean, and developing a vision for yourself, how your life plays out. And that can be a really hard process to go through, especially if you're from two different nationalities and live in a third country and have children that are third culture kids. And I'm not saying it's easy, right?
Right.
But
And
I
it is
think
a skill you have to learn. Like, you have to learn it.
it's a skill you have to learn. And, you know, like, I mean, there's a reason, I think, why so many couples are, you know, are divorced. I mean, I think there are no official statistics, but probably between us, we probably know quite a few that have maybe broken up or didn't last because, you know, there's so many tensions individually and then as a couple. So having the process, talking through what does our life together look like? Where do you want to go? How does it look? How does it flow? What's important to us individually, and how does it come together as a couple? That's a start, right? And then you will see, do you find that compromise that you can make it work? And I've seen so many
Yeah.
couples finding unique ways of making it work that just work for them. It wouldn't work for anyone else.
Yeah.
That I could give examples, but it's just, I think.
But I think knowing that you are like you are crafting your life story is part of the realization, right?
Yes.
Over and over, you have to realize, like you said in the beginning, no one's making this decision for you. There's
Yes.
no path. And so I think having that language of like, what do we want our life to look like together is super important. And it's a little bit like someone else, when I interviewed them, said, what is the difference between someone living abroad and someone who doesn't? And it's like, you have a culture. It's not just normal. And so in this way, I think couples who live abroad know they are crafting their life
Mm.
story and they have to be intentional about it.
And
And
can
so
I just
learning
say,
that,
you
yeah,
said something about, you know, the forces that kind of play on it. Like, I remember when me and my partner, so he's a different nationality than me, when we started dating about 6 months into the relationship, we had to have the conversation around, do I want children, and can I imagine living abroad, because he was going on an assignment. And like, in what normal relationship would you have after 6 months of dating, would you have the conversation, right? Maybe if you're a certain age, but like, normally I think we see relationships unfolding a bit more. And as you said before, I think something like it just happens. You can't have that when you live an international life. So you're kind of forced into it. But if you know that early on, you can also consciously start doing it earlier than
yeah,
maybe the forces coming at you.
yeah. And I think it just leads to different life. So I think it's really beautiful, but knowing you're in it is a really important step that I know it sounds basic, but I think if this is the first time you've moved abroad with your partner, no, I think you have a leg up if you know that you are crafting your life story and you have to do it intentionally. I know that it's for you very old hat, but I think for others it might not be.
Mhm.
Okay, I want to shift a little bit. So you have something that you say about a portfolio career. I
Mm-hmm.
really want you to tell us about that. Like, I've seen you talk about it on your Instagram posts and LinkedIn. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So where did this really come from? Is that, you know, we talked a lot about it, and in a way, it's accumulation of everything we talked about. Is that the idea? You know, I always had this idea, I wanted a linear career, you know, climb up the ladder, you know, whatever, be CEO one day, whatever. You had the idea. But you know, with me moving around, and obviously then with my relationship, and it didn't work, right? So portfolio career really is not defined by a specific industry or a specific role. It's basically the idea that you don't follow a traditional career path. So instead of accumulating a career path, you're accumulating skills, right? So think about it as a portfolio of skills that you can use in different settings, you know, in different industries. And so in my case, you know, I had a very traditional career in a way, like project management, business development, you know, doing the work in international development. I could have continued with that. But I was like, okay, how can I diversify? How can I be more resilient by adding new skills? So now I'm leaning into coaching. And, you know, that's kind of, in the moment, that's my main hat. But I can still do some consulting if I wanted. I can still tap into my other skills. And there'll probably be more, you know, the writing might be something I might want to look into it a bit more, like I enjoy that. So maybe there's some professional avenues as a writer, you know, that I could tap into. So the idea is that you think about skills rather than job roles or specific career paths.
Okay. And so do you think would you encourage people to look for those opportunities to expand when they first arrive to a new place? Like maybe take a degree, or if they can, obviously, or take classes, or is that something that you actively have people look at as part of their settling process or something?
Yeah, I would basically say because I don't, the majority of my clients actually that I support are not in the process of relocating, if that makes sense. So the one-to-one clients I support, they are settled somewhere, or they're thinking about what it is. So I think more than maybe the settling process, even though it's a great way to add skills, is more to think about what do what do you enjoy. So if it's an like a lot of people are drawn to portfolio career because the idea that they can lean into different versions of themselves, right? They can explore different passions, they don't feel stuck into one thing. So I think it's more for people that have that multi-passionate, like multi-dimensional nature to them, to say, well, I actually really like the idea that I can do maybe two completely different things, or I can actually maybe make my hobby a career one day or whatever, right? So I think it's probably more for those people. Because I'm saying that because I'm saying if you're really passionate, let's say, about a specific skill you have, let's say you're a lawyer, you will always find ways to lean into that skill, even though you move abroad, right? You might use it in different ways, but you might need to use it in a different way. So you don't necessarily need to add new skills to use your legal skills when you move abroad. So that's why I'm distinguishing it quite different in terms of when a portfolio career is right for you. Does that
Yeah.
help?
Yeah, it helps. But I also think that it's something that um, it's a very important perspective, right? Because like you said, with a lawyer, you or a nurse or a doctor, if you've moved to a new country, sometimes you can't use your license. And so having that perspective is very important, that you're still using your
Yes.
experience,
Yeah.
but
Correct.
maybe in a different way. Yeah. And so
Yes.
would
Correct.
you say would you say that that is one way to view how, your life might be different than you expected? I mean, that's one shift that you can have um, in this is work. And I think that that is super helpful. Also, but I think even if you're in your own country, this skill, it actually makes you, again, more present to the things that life might throw at you. So even if you do one assignment and move back, your that
Mhm.
perspective that your life is long and your career is diversified could really help in general with your life path, I
I
think.
think so. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I wanted to. Where do I want to go next? I have two places I want to go, and I just need to decide which one I want to do first. Why don't you tell me about your um, favorite? Well, yeah, let's see. Tell me how you think when you go back. How do you tell your clients when they go back home or to visit family? How do you, maybe
Mm.
you or your client, how do you have them explain that to their families? Like, when are you coming home? Why are you doing this? Um, do you have something that helps them cope with that?
You've been breaking up a bit. Can you repeat your question?
Oh, yeah, sure. So how do you give your clients maybe a way of explaining their life choices? I can sum it up a bit better. So when they go home or they're talking to their friends that they went to university with, why do you guys do this thing? Do you have a way that people can explain their choices to others?
Mm. Interesting. An interesting question. I've never been asked the question. So probably the first I probably would say that it's probably an inward looking exercise first is be clear what your values are, right? Like it's always if someone else tells me about, like my value is adventure, right? Or my value is freedom or whatever that value might be, and explain it from that angle, it makes a lot more sense, right? Like in a sense of first of all, I messages and what's important to me. So getting clear on what your values is and what the value behind living that life is. That probably would be the first thing because that's a very good anchor to tell even
Right. You're
family.
stronger in it.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're strong in it,
Yeah.
and people will explain it.
Yeah. Okay. So this is same path, like finding your intuition, finding your path. Last thing I want to ask you about is friendships. You've just spoken about this so eloquently on LinkedIn,
Mm.
about how some friendships are forever, some friendships are made for long distance, I think is what you said, and some friendships are not. Can you speak a bit to this and your insights into it?
I don't think I found the answer to why that is. I wish I could give someone the formula to say, put in here your friendship, and I'll tell you whether
No.
this one will last. No,
No,
no
no, no. That's
technology.
not.
I think
No.
I know that's not what you're asking, but sometimes I wish I would have it,
Yes.
because it's just really surprising to me. And I think again, talking, um, just realizing that some of your friendships won't last. Right? I know it's a really hard thing to hear, but just don't going, or relocating and thinking everything's going to be green on the other side and all your friends you had back home will stay the same. It's not, right? You change, they change. You're not there most of the time, right? Out of sight, out of mind. That's the first thing just to realize, right? And then it's about, I think, again, international life forces us to be more intentional. So you are automatically more intentional, and you have to be more intentional with the people you want to stay in touch with. So that's a good thing, right? Because you're gonna lean into the friendships you want to lean in. But even then, you don't know, And I think just going with the flow on that, and again, grieving if it's been a really important friendship, taking the time to process that, if it's not from your side that it happened, that's just an ever evolving process, and I'm going through that right now, and it's painful.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Even this many moves later, you can never be. You were never the expert, right? They were never the expert, but all we're doing is helping guide others with our experience. But
Yeah.
yeah, that is really important to know. And I think that the last thing, I know I said friendship was the last thing, but within couples, what do you see? I feel like people, even if you're doing the same move in the same country, in the same, what we've touched on a lot is that you're having different experiences. And I think people within a couple will shift at different times and have
Mm.
different experiences. And so what have you seen that helps stay in the same? You don't have to stay in the same, but like an awareness around that you will shift and change at different times, I think is important. Do you have any wisdom around that?
um I mean, I wonder whether that sounds so cliche or something, but like wanting the best for your partner, and being there to support him in his own growth journey, right? Like, I mean, just in my relationship, or what I see with some, with even just friends, right? How people change and evolve so much, right? Like it can really change drastically, and if you don't have a fixated view, I guess, about how your partner should be, and let the person evolve, and you evolve together, then you're gonna stay open and you're gonna grow together, right? If you have a fixated view about how your partner's supposed to be and always like that, it's gonna be hard to, you know, emulate around a life that is ever changing.
Yeah. And I think that that happens on steroids when you move abroad. Maybe it's just if you move to Amsterdam, I doubt it. But it feels like people have kind of a second, well, every time you move to a new country, it adds to your identity a bit. And so you change more drastically than you would, say, if you still lived in the same
Yeah.
place for 20
Hmm.
years.
Hmm.
And so I think it's really beautiful. But what I've experienced with a lot of my people that are around me is that it's scary sometimes, or it's unexpected, or maybe you don't like the person they're becoming, and that is something, that is one difference of moving coupled, because you are one person when you arrive and you do not leave the same person.
Yes.
And by any stretch of the imagination. So and I guess the point isn't to stay together, but if the point is to stay together, I think there are ways to make it more easy, and having an awareness around it is the first one. That
Yes.
everyone's
Yeah. And
changing.
I think,
You can't possibly do this life without changing.
yeah, but also I think what you said, you might not stay together, right? Like, I mean, I think the inevitable might happen that you develop into different people, and your values might not be aligned, what you talked about before, right? What you want out of life. And I think we need to give people as you said, the identity changed. So also people evolve and change, right? And that's a good thing. And not always you're going to evolve together, right? The hopefully is that you
Yep.
do. But yeah, in the rare cases you don't.
And I think an international move puts that any of those
Mm,
differences on full display.
yes.
And so it actually can make things even more fun, I think, as well. So it feels like it's a catalyst for whatever maybe would have happened anyway, but it is, I find it very rich and beautiful. And never for me is it the point that people stay together, but I think it's really beautiful that it is another factor in making your relationship or your life story with that person more rich. That I find it very interesting.
But yeah, but it also, I can hear a value there for you, right? Like in terms of
Yeah.
how you look at relationships, how you look at life, and like a bit like what I can maybe hear is like the curiosity and the kind of like, oh, there is something new to lean into. And I think that's also a personality trait,
Yeah.
to a certain extent. We can all learn it, obviously, and personalities change. But to say that it always depends where you come from, right? What's your personality and how easy that might be for you to adapt to things like that.
Yep. It might be really hard. And
Yeah.
I just want to warn people whenever someone's moving here, I sit them down for coffee and I'm like, okay, just so you know, you're both going to change. And it can be fun or scary, probably both, but you should know that because you can feel very alone if you don't know that. If you think you're going to come here and stay exactly the same, it might be a hard time for you. So I think it comes out of protection that I want people to know this and just enjoy, try and enjoy it. So
And
yeah,
can
that's
I
cool.
also just normalize one thing, like couple therapy, completely normal, right? Can we just
Yes.
be honest that it's completely normal if you're in a long-term relationship that, yeah, maybe you need help sometimes as a couple together and yourself, coach or therapist, depending what you need, right? I think just talking therapy, having someone that is not there that helps you process things as a couple or alone at different points in life, so enriching, because you just get out of your own way so much more.
Yeah. Yeah. And interestingly, it's really hard to find, not in Amsterdam, but I think worldwide, it's hard to find people who actually specialize in this experience. So having that extra experience on top of just being a marriage therapist or a coach, I think is really valuable. So what you're doing, I think it's that extra level of expertise that is, it can get you further in your journey or
Mm,
it gives you an extra level of understanding. So I really think what you're doing is really
thank you.
important for the community. Okay. Um, so I want to know if there are any books that you recommend or media that you recommend to your own community that we can pass along, that's yours or others.
Um, so, I mean, for mine, you mentioned this already, like my blog or my website or LinkedIn is basically where I tell stories and, from my clients or myself in terms of where people might find themselves. I'm trying to tell stories about me and my life that can resonate. So hopefully everybody will take something away. And because we talked a lot about couples, I know they're not specialized on um, international couples specifically, but the Gottman Institute. Um, I'm not sure if you're nodding, so you might have heard of them. I think are excellent. They have some excellent resources. And then there's a book. So excellent resources generally. We talked about communication and we talked about visioning. So there's some excellent resources around doing that that they have. And give you that kind of nugget. And then I think there's a book. I don't know. I think the book is called Transitions. Um, and I think it's by the author is called William Bridges. Maybe I can find the names for you if you want to put it in the show notes. But there are a
Yeah, we'll
couple
put it
of
in the notes.
there are a couple of books that I can recommend if it's specifically people that are interested in reading more about transitions or career change and how our identity shifts and career identity. I can give you a couple of recommendations if you want to.
Great. And if people want to work with you, how do they do that?
Yeah, so I basically work one-to-one with people. I offer coaching programs. So if people want to find out about that, again, my website or on my LinkedIn, feel free to connect. I do offer everybody who considers themselves interested in coaching a coaching discovery call. So then, we can talk about what your challenge might be, and we can honestly talk about whether I'm the right person. I'm not always the right person, and whether there's a fit. And so they can find more about that on my website.
Okay. So is the best place to reach out on LinkedIn?
Yeah, that probably is the
Okay.
best place. Yeah.
So reach out on LinkedIn, and then you can have a chat. Cool. And then you will put all of your information in the show notes. But
Yes, I can. Happy to provide it.
yeah, I really appreciate you being on today, and I love keeping up with all of your posts online. I think they're so helpful. Even if if someone doesn't have the capacity to work with you right now, just go to her LinkedIn or her Instagram, and it always gives me a new nugget to think about and perspective that I need usually. So, yeah, I just love the work you're doing, and thanks for putting it out in the world.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to see what House of Peregrine will unfold. How this will unfold.
Yeah, it's ever unfolding, isn't it? Thanks for
Yeah.
being a part of it.
Yeah. Thank you.